Hey, what's up everybody? It's Daniel from HowToMen here today, and we are doing a phone comparison between the iPhone 7 Plus and the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge. So let's get right into the specs. The Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge is packing a 12 megapixel camera with optical image stabilization and a 5 megapixel front-facing camera. The version we have is the Snapdragon 820 version, which has 4 GB of RAM and an Adreno 530 GPU. It has a 1440p Super AMOLED display and 3600 mAh battery, as well as a micro USB for the port, and it also worth mentioning it has no stereo speaker. Meanwhile, the iPhone 7 Plus has a dual 12 megapixel camera with optical image stabilization on one of the cameras, a 7 megapixel front facing camera. It is powered by an A10 Fusion chip, which is a quad core 2.3 GHz chip. Apple claims it has a 6-core GPU within this chip. On the front, it has a 1080p IPS display and it's powered by a 2900 mAh battery. This phone uses Lightning Connector 2.0 and actually does have stereo speakers, but it does not have a headphone jack. Let's get right into the design. The S7 Edge is a phone with glass on both sides and a slight camera bump. On the front glass, you have the curved edges, which is why it's called the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge. And these edges give you specific software features that Samsung has baked into TouchWiz. While I think Samsung's phone looks great and the edges are very visually appealing, I feel like they do make it a bit harder to hold the phone, and it makes it a bit easier for the device to slip out of your hands and makes it easier to drop. I also think it makes pressing some of the buttons very awkward. The iPhone, meanwhile, has a metal unibody design with rounded glass that fades sort of into the metal aspect of it. It has a bigger camera bump than the Galaxy S7 Edges, so that's definitely something to note. And if you're not using a case and you set it on a flat surface, you will definitely get rocking of the device. They both have a similar button layout, but the iPhone has the extra silent switch, which they've had for several years now. They also have fingerprint sensors in the home button. Now, from what I've noticed, the iPhone seems to have the faster fingerprint sensor. Maybe this is due to Samsung's software and them requiring you to hold on to it, but with the iPhone you can just tap it and it unlocks very quickly. Who wins the design? Well, I think that's up to personal preference. I think they both look great, and while I don't like holding the Galaxy S7 Edge, I could see why it wouldn't be a problem with people who have different size hands, but for me, I think the iPhone's just easier to hold. One thing I can say about both of these devices is that they would look great in a skin or case from our friends over at SlickWraps. Specifically on these phones that are very much so fingerprint magnets, having these skins or cases can be very convenient, and so make sure to check those out in the description down below. Thank you. Now let's move on to the screen. This is a bit easier to judge because while both devices have great looking screens and good brightness, the S7 Edge just simply has the higher resolution display. You get all the added features of having an Edge display as well, which is very cool. You get Samsung's shortcuts for apps, contacts, and many other things. But when it comes to staring at them side to side, you can just notice that the S7 Edge is a bit more crisp, and I think this is what gives it the advantage to me. Battery life is the next thing we're going to be discussing, and it is a bit tricky to pin down because everyone has specific usage. In my case personally, I saw that the S7 Edge had decent battery life, but I found myself struggling towards the end of the day and worrying about whether I would make it with enough charge. For the iPhone, I've only had it for 2 days, but in these 2 days I've used it fully and I haven't had to worry about this at all. While I definitely wouldn't call this test scientific, I ended the day with the iPhone with plenty of battery life. However, the S7 Edge, I would always be rushing towards a charger once I got home. Next, the audio on both of these devices is pretty similar besides the fact that the iPhone doesn't have a headphone jack. Speaker wise, I would say the iPhone has the nicer speaker thanks to the stereo system. It is just louder and you have it facing you slightly with the front facing speaker. Meanwhile, the Galaxy S7 Edge has the advantage of a 3.5mm headset jack, which sounds ridiculous, but I guess we can write that down as an advantage. Next, let's go and talk about the OS. So this is basically where both of these phones differ. We all know that the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge is running TouchWiz, which is Samsung's modified version of Android, and the iPhone is running iOS. So in my opinion, TouchWiz and iOS have distinct strengths. In iOS, I feel like you get an OS that's a bit more polished and has better performance and is just smoother overall. This has a lot to do with the power-packed A10 and the fact that Apple has incredible optimization for the operating system. However, with Android and TouchWiz, you get a more complete device in regards to productivity. The S7 Edge has Android's superior notification handling, which will only improve even more once this device gets Android N. Another advantage that you get from using Android is that you do have the more flexible OS. You can cater it to your needs specifically. While with the iPhone, I found that some things I used to do with my Android just simply aren't possible because the apps and or the Apple ecosystem just doesn't allow it. So this basically comes down to personal preference and what you need more. If you're a person who values the polished and smooth OS and are simply happy using the better optimized apps such as Snapchat and all those which perform much better on iOS. Some of these apps even include Google's own apps such as Hangouts, which I feel performs better on iOS than it does on Android. If that is what you're looking for, then I would definitely pick up iOS. However, if you need more from your notification system and you do stuff that's very specific to you, I would bet that Android is the better choice for you specifically because it's a more flexible OS. While it may not always be clean, you can say that it is orientated towards productivity. Lastly, let's take a look at the cameras. Both of these devices have great cameras, however the Edge gets the nod here because it has better low light performance. When we're outside at night shooting, the S7 Edge clearly took better pictures. Right now we are going to be showing you guys shots that we took on both devices so you guys can compare. Both phones produce great shots, however the few images that we captured, I felt like the S7 Edge just had a better result. In conclusion, both of these are fantastic phones, and while I think you can't go wrong with either one, if I was in a store today, I personally would take the iPhone. Simply because for me, the Edge display does not bring any advantages, and while I would certainly miss a lot about Android, I feel like the iOS experience is superior to TouchWiz in my opinion and for my personal needs. Thankfully for me, Android isn't limited to the Samsung Galaxy series and there are a ton more devices to check out. Anyways guys, that's all for this video. Make sure to subscribe and drop a like if you appreciated the content, and stay tuned for more iPhone comparisons as well as other Android videos. Kapow!